just ask you, the participants, if you wouldn't mind just for a moment to just use the chat and to pop into that chat and just say, what to you does sustainable mean? You know, what pops into your head when you think about sustainable or sustainability? So if I could ask you just to use that chat box at the bottom and just to contribute a few words or a word as to what sustainability might mean to you. Okay. Don't be shy. And I suppose the other one would be in terms of, you know, yeah, people are putting in there long term, yeah, supporting community development, being able to live and work locally, yeah, can keep going, thinking of the future, being able to live and work locally, yeah, living with future generations in mind, fantastic, yeah. Thinking of the future, ensuring it's viable for all aspects of life, and something that will last and benefit from Sylvia there, humans and non-humans, and not damage the future. Fantastic, thank you. Now, if you wouldn't mind, just for a moment as well, just thinking about the other aspect of the talk today is the viable community. We all live in communities, whether it's urban, rural, you know, communities of interest, you know. So what, in your opinion, does a viable community look like? Okay, as I say, we're all living in communities. So what's a viable community for you? Probably not unrelated to some of the things you've already mentioned, but let's hear from you if you have any thoughts about what a viable community looks like. Okay, so Patricia, organic, where all people feel included, excellent. Okay, a strong and bonded group, like-minded people, yeah. Resources and amenities that we need, absolutely. Space and time that's adequate for all. Where people work together, where their families support, and the schools and work locally, yeah. So it's very much looking at that whole interconnectivity, looking at all the different dimensions of our lives. And I think you're speaking to that, all of you there, in terms of, yeah, looking at those values that are really important, being supportive, responsive, sharing, caring for vulnerable. So it's a very inclusive view of the community, of a viable community. And I completely concur with that. So, excellent. So, I mean, some of the definitions of sustainable, you know, very often speak about that being about not depleting finite resources. And that's a huge shift for all of us in terms of thinking about resources as being finite, whether it's, you know, the air we breathe, whether it's water, whether it's the soil from which our food is grown, and all of the energy that it requires to produce all of the things that we need, the homes that we're in and so on. So, you know, and you've already spoken to the aspect of future generations, but it's really immediate right now, as even as we saw today or heard today from the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, they're talking about the fact that we really need to ramp up in all sectors of society what we need to be doing in terms of averting catastrophe, really. So I think, you know, all of our speakers today are going to I think be speaking to that and looking at how we can transform our passion, you know, for sustainability, for our belief in viable communities into jobs. Many of us for years have maybe been working in voluntary capacities. I've been involved with Transition Kerry since the beginning in 2007, and I think some of my colleagues or steering committee are here. And yeah, I suppose I just was really, I suppose, concerned and passionate about how we can have a much more holistic approach to how we live, work in our lives. And the issues that we would have looked at, there were all the interconnected issues of, you know, food, waste, water, energy, transport. And these are things that Deirdre and Rose and Katrina are all going to speak about now shortly. So the plan for this is an informal conversation style. So we have various maybe questions that we've discussed in advance of this, and I'm going to maybe turn to Katrina first, if that's okay. And Katrina has had a long time interest and I suppose, yeah, passion for this work and for sustainability. And perhaps before you get into talking a little bit about the circular economy, which is something that you've been thinking about quite a bit, could you say a little bit about your own path in terms of how you've got to here?
Sure. Yeah, I suppose as is the case with an awful lot of people, it's often a love of the natural world from when I was a child and seeing that natural world under threat. I mean, I grew up in the kind of, I'm 55, 60s and 70s, so there was a lot more of the natural world present when I was a child, and that love of nature led me to want to kind of protect it where I could. And maybe over the last 10 to 12 years, more focusing particularly on climate change, because that's obviously a sort of existential threat to everything that lives on the earth. So I would have started by making changes to my own life in terms of how I traveled, the food that I ate, the energy that I used. But I was very conscious that that had a sort of minimal impact in the wider scheme of things. And at the time I was working in Theatre and Arts Centre in Tralee, Síomsa, and I spent time there as the acting CEO and as the CEO. And that was, I suppose, that gave me a very unique opportunity to kind of influence change. There was a supportive staff team who were interested in the whole idea of sustainability, and there was a very supportive board. And what we basically took on was the idea of greening the whole organisation. And again, in particular, there was a holistic approach, which I think helps, and it helps for people to identify with that if you're looking at biodiversity and waste and so on, but particularly at climate change and reducing our carbon footprint. So one of the interesting things about being involved in a theatre or an organisation like that is there are so many stakeholders, so many people using that building, that the potential for influence is much more significant than maybe in some workplaces, and certainly doing that in the home. And that sort of extended then to trying to see if there was a possibility of extending those learnings out into a wider community of the arts sector. And over a period of time working with Theatre Forum, and eventually last year we set up the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland, and we're mentored by a wonderful organisation in Scotland, Creative Carbon Scotland, who had done fantastic work reducing the carbon footprint of the arts sector there. And so at the moment I'm running, with some support from Theatre Forum, a greening venues pilot project. So working with 7 venues throughout the country to reduce all of their environmental impacts, but again with a focus on energy and carbon footprint. So, and again, there's that fantastic potential that arts centres and theatres have to spread that influence out into that much wider stakeholder group, and that I find that really interesting, and also the role that art can play, which is why I picked that drawing by Lisa Fingleton of me rather than a photograph. It's supposed to be a sort of, I'm poking fun at myself, I'm a sort of tubby little superhero in my little sustainability cape, but I used an artist to convey and to communicate that, and I think that's an important way of working with the arts to communicate that message.
Absolutely, Katrina, thank you. And I suppose you've really highlighted, I suppose, that interweaving, you know, the interconnectivity. It's not possible to do any of this without looking at all of the different dimensions of how we live our lives. And I think that's what you find with people who are passionate about this. It's not just one dimension or one aspect. Maybe gone are the days where we saw work as being something really separate, and then we had our other aspects of our lives. And I think that's what maybe today we're also looking at. We're really looking at that interweaving, I suppose, of all aspects of our lives, you know. Okay, thank you. Do you want to say at this point, Katrina, or yeah, maybe at this point you just say a little bit about the circular economy, and then maybe move on to you then, Rose and Deirdre, just talking a little bit about what both of you were involved in. Okay, so just...
Yeah, I suppose when we start to look at this whole topic in advance of today, and the whole idea of the circular economy, because it has potential to create jobs, and the traditional method, I suppose, of creating objects and of using resources is sort of a linear system where we extract resources, whether it's fertility in the soil, whether it's energy, whether it's mined materials, and we use those materials to make something, we create that thing, and in quite a short space of time, we dispose of it and we throw it out. And there's a fascinating woman, Ellen MacArthur, who really is an exemplar of what you're talking about today, somebody who has a passion for something. She was a very fantastic sailor, won all kinds of awards, and I've learned a lot from her, and she describes it really well. And this whole system that we have, where the value that's there at the beginning, those resources, are just literally disposed of at the end, and they're also disposed of in a way that it's very, very difficult to extract any value from them. And we tend to think of recycling as being a kind of a virtuous way of disposing of something, but she would see it as the loop of last resort. So there's a kind of an implicit failure that if you get to the point of recycling something, and we do it rather crudely, well, then we've kind of failed at some level. So her whole idea of this circular economy is that materials go on a series of loops through a system. And one of the big pluses around that is the emphasis is shifted from something being created with a kind of built-in obsolescence and being used briefly and disposed of, to the idea that there's a financial benefit to the manufacturer if an item is created and lasts for much longer. Because instead of maybe buying objects, which is a big cultural shift for us, we might look at renting those objects. So instead of renting your washing machine, instead of buying your washing machine, you rent it. And if you rent your washing machine, it's in the interest of the person who's renting it to you that that washing machine lasts for a long time because they get more financial return. But also if it needs to be repaired, that it's easy to repair. And if it can't be repaired, that it can be repurposed. So there's a whole change that would imply a whole change in the way we use resources, we make things, and how we own them. And there are examples in the Netherlands, for example, of subscription schemes for children's clothes, where you subscribe to a particular organization, they send you the children's clothes for a certain age, you send them back at a certain point, and they send you what you need for that next age group. All the time, with those clothes being made on the basis that they're durable, as opposed to what we have now, which is where people might wear clothes for 2 or 3 wears and throw them out. So I think there is apparently a document produced by the EU in March of this year, and their belief was that that circular economy has the potential to create as much as 700,000 jobs throughout the EU. At sort of every intersection of those loops, there is potential for innovation, for entrepreneurship, and for employment.
Mm. Okay, thank you. It made me smile there, thinking back to my own days when all the clothes went, we passed it all through our network here in the community, friends passing on clothes, and then I suppose got passed down through my 3 different kids. But I really like that concept. And yeah, things were a bit more durable, I think, then. Perhaps if I could, and this may be Deirdre or Rose, I suppose the social enterprise framework or the social enterprise policy that was published last year is something that I suppose is very relevant now as we look at the whole issue of sustainability and jobs creation. So I'm wondering if either, Deirdre or Rose would like to come in, or both of you perhaps on that one.
Do you want to start, Rose? Or? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So first of all, my name's Rose Barrett. I'm a Galway woman that moved to Mayo because I could. Don't tell them in Galway. I do have a particular soft spot for Kerry because we used to windsurf down in the Maharees, and whenever I can get back down again, I'd be most delighted to do that. But just to give a quick little bit of what we're about, who I am, and then I'll come to your piece, Mary. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. Thanks.
I'm co-founder of GrowMote, and in all honesty, that was never the plan. GrowMote's an Irish nonprofit, and our mission is to make remote work local and accessible. Now, we've been at this for the last probably about 2.5 years. It's totally started as a community project. There was never any intention to incorporate as a nonprofit or, us to be, going into roles, nothing like that. My co-founder, Tracy Close, so it's, as I like to say, all her fault. Fair play to her. She just took the bull by the horns and ran with it, because what all of us we're seeing is the decline of our rural communities. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Tracy spotted, because this is how she's good at very big picture stuff, is the potential of remote work to help us regenerate our communities, to give people employment, to reduce our carbon emissions, to get movement back in the knowledge happening around communities. And we're really getting there. So we incorporated last year, early in the year. We spent the year building our community ourselves, our chapters. That's at the heart of Grow Remote, but also looking to see if we could secure funding that we could become a sustainable organisation. We secured the funding in January this year through Enterprise Ireland. So that was for 3 roles. One of those roles is going to be opened up quite soon. So we've already hired our general manager. So that was up until, I think it was actually 9 weeks ago. We were still 100% voluntary. But then we brought in John Avoy, who's the chap who brought Men's Shed to Ireland. He's now our GM. I interviewed for the community manager role and was successful. And we have a companies lead that's going to be hired for in the next couple of months. So keep your eyes peeled. That's going to be a really, really lovely role. And for anybody that's interested in this area, I think it'll be extremely appealing. For myself then, reared in a pub in Athenry in Galway. I think community's just always been, it's what I've always known. We were always around people. I'm smiling as well, Katrina, because we were very much brought up in a household that liked to go out into nature. Dad had great fun getting us to taste sloes, so these berries that are very tart, and getting great entertainment out of us, having that reaction of the tart flavour. And as well, Mary, actually I'm smiling because I remember great excitement of getting new bags of clothes from the friend's family and having like something kind of shiny and new. Yep. And it was new to us, so it didn't matter that it didn't come from the shop. But for myself, I worked in hospitality for years. I went into college as a mature student, studied equine science, so I'm actually technically a horse scientist by trade. But while I was doing that, we did a lot of marketing and entrepreneurship, and I started to get really interested in peer-to-peer sharing. So as you talk about the circular economy, Katrina, something I find extremely interesting, and I see some really, like all of the projects you've talked about gives me such hope. So I suppose that seed was planted in my head around social enterprise. And a few years later, I've been working for myself. I've met Tracy. Grow Remote has become something, and suddenly we discover we've got a social enterprise. And we were at it was International Social Enterprise Day there last week. John spoke actually for the webinar there. And one of the big call outs that we've all had is there's been fantastic supports coming through, but I think we need to tell the story of how social enterprises come to be, how somebody can get involved. Like that is literally, I happen to be doing volunteering out in the community, running events with Tracy, and when she had a good idea, she asked me if I'd come on board to share that journey with her, and that's how I got involved. And I think in the sharing of those stories, the practicalities of how people get involved will make it more real, because we're not superhumans. I make mistakes and I get things wrong, but we're all learning from each other, and the support we've gotten from other social enterprises around the country has made all the difference for us.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think much greater publicity and awareness is needed, and I think the policy document highlighted that and said that. Rose, and I mean, I'm really interested in terms of the remote working. So there are 3 of you, and you could all be in different places all around the country. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, have I lost the sound there? Yep. Okay, sorry, I just lost you for a second, Rose. Okay, Deirdre, going to Deirdre, who is the manager of the Dingle Hub, the Dingle Creativity and Innovation Hub in Dingle. And I suppose, if you would maybe tell us a little bit about the Dingle Hub and how its aim is to build a flourishing community and your goal to facilitate well-paid jobs year-round in Dingle, Deirdre.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I think it follows on nicely from Rose there in, I suppose, how social enterprises get established and how people get involved, because I have a similar but yet different story in how the whole process evolved. And maybe if I take a step back and just give a little bit of my own history and how I became involved in the Dingle Hub and what it does.
That would be great.
So I suppose I was raised here on the Dingle Peninsula, and I grew up being told that you know, if you want to progress, if you want to have a career in life, it's out the road and keep going, basically, that there weren't any opportunities in an area like the Dingle Peninsula, at least not for what I trained in, which was electronic engineering. And I followed my interest. I did love that, but I knew at the time that there was never going to be any roles in, or I thought at the time there was never going to be any roles in a place like Dingle. That didn't matter to me when I was younger, but as I grew up, as I had a family, community just became so important to me. And I suppose I missed that. I missed that in the urban living, in that I would put my kids to school a 20-minute drive from where I lived, and then I would have another 20-minute drive to where I work, and all of these things were disconnected. So it was very hard to build a sense of community. So I took the plunge back in 2012, and we decided to move back to the Dingle Peninsula. I had been doing remote working, or working from home, for about 3 years before that in Cork City. And I was able to manage that, and it allowed me a lot of flexibility. My children were quite young at the time, and I was able to bring some of those roles with me. So very early remote working, not a lot of tools in place to do it all, but I managed. And then I suppose in 2018, I saw that the Dingle Hub was advertising for the role as manager. And it did involve working with a lot of different stakeholders and organizations. I had been doing that in a previous role in Cork. So I had been working with the educational institutes there, with the engineering companies, with government departments, to encourage students in the area of STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. So this was a very similar role in the Dingle Hub, and as I was fortunate enough to get it, and the reason that it was there was that a group of local business people came together. They saw that there was an opportunity for areas like Dingle, or in particular for the Dingle Peninsula here, with the advent of fast, reliable broadband, that there could be an opportunity to diversify the jobs here on the peninsula, to take a look at, I suppose, creating the conditions where well-paid year-round jobs were now possible here, and they saw the establishment of a hub as the vehicle to do that, and to facilitate that. So the board, I suppose, obtained funding from Enterprise Ireland through the Regional Enterprise Development Fund to put a manager on board, and that's where our paths crossed. Then I started in 2018. And fundamentally, we provide space for remote workers here on the peninsula. We see our role as creating, I suppose, facilitating connections between all the remote workers, ensuring they feel supported, developing training mechanisms, developing workshops, bringing the community together, identifying mutually beneficial collaboration opportunities. I love to see it happen. You know, in a co-working space, you wouldn't get that really in a company in those water cooler moments, because everyone's working on similar type stuff. If you're in a pharmaceutical company, it's the same type stuff you're focused on, but you could have people working in the hub who are in film production right next to somebody who is installing electric vehicle chargers somewhere. And I am always amazed at the potential to find collaboration between different, I suppose, sectors. And that's one of the beauty of the hubs. And it's the beauty, I suppose, of that flexible working that we're now all used to. So that was our first thing. But I suppose Rose will testify to this. We would have said before COVID that there was a body of work to do for the next number of years to simply create awareness of the benefits of remote working and what was available for people now. And I think COVID has changed that completely. We know that once we have a laptop, we can work from the top of the mountain if we have some level of connectivity up there. And so we had set out to establish projects in 3 distinct areas in the hub, just to, I suppose, foster that ecosystem whereby companies would want to base themselves here, would want to base teams here. People who were remote working felt they were connected into that ecosystem. And we chose 3 pillars. One, on top of the list being sustainability, because I suppose we identified that this has to happen. We absolutely do not have a choice in the changes that we have to make. It has to be supported, it has to be resourced, it has to be financed, and there has to be new ways of doing things. So we saw a lot of opportunities in that area, and we set about exploring projects in that space. We did the same under the digital transformation, because very similarly, the digital transformation is all around us. What enables us to communicate today is the digital transformation. And we've just seen a giant, I suppose, leap in that in the last 6 months in what we can now do. But it is about identifying opportunities under that too. And the third pillar then was the creative industries, because I suppose we're surrounded by a wealth of talent in the creative sector here on the Dingle Peninsula. And we always saw the potential to merge that with with different sectors, with technology, with innovation, with entrepreneurship, to, I suppose, create those magic conditions where you get some very exciting outcomes. And that's the reason for being for the Dingle Hub, and we have a number of projects established down through the years, and I'm sure we can get into some specifics of the types of jobs or the type of projects that have been funded and the type of work that we are seeing needed for the future as well.
Well, Deirdre, thank you very much. Yeah, you've covered a whole range of jobs there, and I know that you're involved in the agricultural sector, the energy sector, and I suppose the energy, energy is one of those big issues for all of us, because okay, we are remote working, but in order to do that, we need energy. We need, to heat our homes. And I suppose maybe to talk a little bit around that whole notion of community energy. And I know that when I became involved with Transition Kerry, the big thing that we talked about was, energy, peak oil, fossil fuels, depleting. And I suppose, we've broadened that as we've gone along, I suppose, to look at just in terms of all resources depleting and diminishing. Including our biodiversity, which is what sustains us and sustains the lives that all of us have. So we can't see ourselves anymore as being separate from or apart from. We are a part of the system. We're one species. And I just maybe wanted to come back to that one of energy and community energy. I know that Transition Kerry would have commissioned an energy plan and an energy report back in 2012, and out of that came KSEC, Kerry Sustainable Energy Co-op. And since then, there are lots and lots of different groups doing work around looking at how renewable energy and how we can, I suppose, bring that much more into focus. And I know, Katrina, that you have, I suppose, been exploring community energy as well, and we're part of the Dingle Hub had an energy mentor program last year. So perhaps I might just come back to you just a little bit about that, because it's something that's that you're passionate about and dear to your heart.
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously the Dingle 2030 is a project that Deirdre would be able to talk a lot about, because that's a fantastic initiative that brings together a lot of different players in that area. But yeah, I suppose just looking at energy, and it is something that fascinates me. There's the whole area of sustainable energy communities. A lot of people would be aware of those. These are community groups that are supported by funding from the SEAI, and a lot of those groups are carrying out energy master plans. And those things don't always run completely smoothly. But what is really positive about the approach from the SEAI is that sense of that they're giving some of that power back to the communities, because we've all seen examples of renewable energy, such as, for example, wind turbines. And when those wind turbines come into a community, they can be seen as very divisive. in part because the community themselves don't necessarily get the kind of benefit, and they can sometimes feel as if they've just been sort of planted there. Now that's changed a little bit. Their regulations have changed around what kind of level of support communities can get. But one of the things we saw as part of the wonderful course that the Dingle Hub ran in late last year and early this year, we went to visit Temple Derry, which is a community, I think it is the first community-owned wind farm in Ireland. So it was a fantastic example. Now, it was a huge amount of work that went into it, but you had a community that was quite disadvantaged in a lot of ways, but had identified this as being an opportunity for them. And over a long period of time, with a lot of commitment and some of their own money as well, they eventually, I think a couple of years ago, those 2 wind turbines were commissioned. Out of that, what they've done is they have created now the first community-owned electricity supplier. And again, I wouldn't have heard about that except for one of the speakers at the Energy Master course, or the Energy Mentor course, taught us about it, and we went to visit them and so on. So I've actually signed up to them to Community Power, and anybody can do it. But it's just that sense that you feel very differently about energy, and you feel very differently about something like a wind turbine if you know that that's benefiting your community. And even a small example, I've got some PV panels here. If you own your own energy, micro generation, you are much more careful about your energy usage. It's a bit like growing your own carrots. You're not going to throw them in the bin. You're going to make sure that you use them. So there's a huge amount of work being done. Just to touch on a local, wonderful, one of the ESB ambassadors, a wonderful man called Dingle Hub, who has set up a sustainable energy community with the West Kerry dairy farmers. And I'm involved in that committee and hope to help, but the initiative comes from him. And it's wonderful to see the dairy farmers themselves having this role where they might be involved in taking more ownership over the energy that they could potentially create, but also looking at their own energy efficiency. And it all really boils down to resilience. And I think resilience is key to how small rural communities will develop over time.
Okay, and I know there's people inputting into the chat here, and I'd encourage you to continue to do so. You know, this is your conversation, and yeah, if you have ideas or thoughts on any of these subjects, please do put them in there, and we will have a Q&A. I'm just watching the time here. Yeah, in about 10 minutes, about 1:45. So put your questions into the Q&A as well for any of the panelists. Do you want to, Rose or Deirdre, add anything to this issue of energy?
I'd love to pick up on the working with the farmers and the agriculture sector. It follows nicely on from what Katrina was saying there. I suppose very early on we recognised, or we knew that agriculture is such an important part and sector for the Dingle Peninsula. We engaged with that. With the farming group here, and Dinny being one of those farmers, who I suppose identified for us some of the key challenges for that sector. And we understood that slurry management and the greenhouse gas emissions leading off that, and the regulations that would be needed to comply with, were all posing challenges for the sector, along with, I suppose, an aging population and the unviability maybe, or the unsustainability economically of farms, and ability to track the next generation into them. So we started exploring anaerobic digestion for the community, which is essentially where you can take feedstocks like slurry and grass and waste products, and you can take them and you can create energy out of them. And in that process, you capture greenhouse gas emissions. You capture the methane. It does create some CO2 emissions, but I believe CO2 is 17 times less potent than methane for the atmosphere. And of course, there are uses for CO2 as well in the drinks industry. So you can implement some nice circular economy technologies within that whole process. We engaged with the Marine and Renewable Energy Institute, who gave us an information session on anaerobic digestion. And then we found that we were supported by Údarás na Gaeltachta through an EU Local Energy Communities project and True Gas Networks Ireland to undertake a feasibility study for anaerobic digestion for the Dingle Peninsula. And it's quite difficult in a remote rural region to make it something like that viable, because we are over 70 kilometres from the nearest grid injection point in Listowel. But that feasibility study is now complete, and they have found ways to make it viable with grid injection to start with, but ultimately with pathways where we would use our own biofuel here on the peninsula once the markets are developed for that. Now, I suppose in that we engaged consultants to produce that feasibility study, but the consultants we chose had put together a consortium of people, and many of those were from the peninsula itself. So we would have had, who knew, an expert who's been designing plants, anaerobic digestion plants in the UK for the past 40 years and around Europe, based here in Ventry. We also had a student, an energy engineering student, who worked for the summer on that study. And now I suppose we'll take that study, which is quite comprehensive, and we will be looking to create a proposal, find the right funding mechanism for a proposal to develop, move into the development phase. Now, the development phase will very much be about identifying a suitable site for a plant here on the peninsula. And with that comes a whole body of community engagement work. It is so important that if a site is identified, that there is a person or team resourced to go out and meet with the homeowners in the surrounding area of that site to front and center address any concerns first off and see what they are, to bring them into communication, to engage. And that would be embedded in any project funding proposal to enable work like that. So I suppose I'm putting that out there, as that is one of the key skills I see in all of these projects are going to be needed in so many communities around the area, and community engagement is going to be a key skill. It was seen as almost voluntary to date. Some organizations have changed, but I'm seeing it coming to the fore, and people with skills in facilitating workshops, in communicating with people, in bringing people together, these skills are going to be in demand as we transition to a low carbon society. Within that development as well, there will be technical expertise needed to complete the design of the plant, and also to bring it to planning permission. And then after that, you have a third funding proposal to bring it to implementation. You could get up to 50% of EU money to actually build a plant here, and then you'd be looking at community ownership with that as well. And beyond that, then you have the jobs in the management of the plant, but you also have diversified incomes for the farming sector. Because if they're producing grass for an anaerobic digester, they could have contracts of, I suppose, reliable contracts of up to, say, 5 years, so that they can depend on those and they can develop their businesses around, I suppose, secure income. At the same time, if you are providing contracts to grow grass for an anaerobic digester plant, it needs to be done in a sustainable manner. And we do have a project that runs parallel with this, that is looking at putting sensors on land and optimizing grassland management techniques. So you could see the potential in the future where, if somebody is to obtain a contract to provide grass for an anaerobic digester, they would need to sign up that they are part of the scheme that is optimizing their grassland management. So they're not putting extra inputs on the land simply to grow grass to produce energy, because that defeats the whole purpose. And I suppose, sorry,
yeah. I'm just conscious, we're just coming up to 22. Yeah.
Yes, I could go on. I'm trying to give examples, I suppose, of the type of roles and jobs.
Roles,
people who can write funding proposals will be very much in demand, I think, as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you said, Deirdre, and maybe Rose or Katrina, you might want to come in on that, because I'm conscious of perhaps some of you who are here online today, that aspect of, as the subheading said, how your passion for sustainability can influence your career and your community. And I suppose you know, to think about, people have passion about food, they have passion about, you know, travel, people have different things that they are really interested in about, as you talked about in the circular economy. There's a whole range of things, you know, about people using resources and materials, but not creating more, but using those. So I wondered, Rose, as well, because you had talked about knowledge sharing and information, you know, through remote working, or if you had any thoughts just about how people might translate that,
Yes,
you know, passion into.
And actually, I'm sitting here, you know, from what Deirdre had said, thinking that exact thing, because you've just mentioned, Deirdre, about having an expert in the area to be able to work with you guys on this project, and that's because that person's been able to remote work. And we're seeing, I know we've all seen this up and down communities. I mean, it's happening globally, but we can see it happening in Ireland, where communities' knowledge is becoming richer because people are getting to access jobs that they might have had to travel for before. And one of the other big ones that you've all, I think, mentioned at this point is collaboration. I have a little a hand-drawn canvas up behind me, and it says more collaboration, less reinventing the wheel. And that's one of the great things about remote working, is we're all getting to share our knowledge with each other. I don't need to learn everything that Katrina knows, because Katrina can tell me, well, this is what we've been working on. You know, same with everybody else. And I think there's just immense power in that. Interesting, actually, just to come back to something you talked about earlier, Mary. You were talking about different resources, and a resource I think we've all talked around today is time. So one of the big things that we get back in remote working is people not needing to commute. And again, by the way, if anybody doesn't like remote working and they want to continue to go into offices, we do not judge. What we're about is choice and flexibility. For us, again, in our mission, it's about viable, sustainable communities. And that's partially around individuals' times where they can spend that, but also the ability to spend that back into the community, to be able to volunteer, to be able to maybe initially, like Deirdre was saying, you know, working on a project in a voluntary capacity, but once it becomes sustainable, then there are roles created there. And again, I will absolutely reiterate and agree with what you're saying around those skill sets, funding applications, workshops, communication, working with different stakeholders. I honestly didn't realize that community management was an actual career until we were in the middle of building Grow Remote, and next thing the possibility showed up. And I'm seeing it everywhere now. And actually, just as a little bit of a reach out, if anybody's interested in that end of things, please do reach out to us, because there's like a little mini group within the Grow Remote community of people who are interested in community management and development. And I've just seen kind of links to jobs and that. So if there's an interest there, do give us a shout.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Can I just encourage you, if you have questions, to pop them into the chat there, and I think there's certainly a couple now in the Q&A. Okay, and we have one here from Marianne Daly. I've over 10 years experience working in a global company. I returned to college as a mature student to study environmental science, but could finish the course. Do you have any advice on creating a career path into sustainable companies, communities? Okay. So I suppose, has anybody here any suggestions or ideas here on this one from Marianne? I mean, my own thoughts, Marianne, would be, you know, obviously you've done the course and training. Have you been involved in any way in a voluntary capacity? You know, I think that really opens up links and possibilities for you. That's for sure. Deirdre, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would. We really welcome people to connect with us on the Dingle Hub through whatever platform makes the most sense to you. I think we're on all the social media platforms. We do have newsletters on the website. You can email us or call us. What tends to happen, or has happened in the past 2 years for us, is people connect with us. It used to be as simple as calling in for a cup of coffee and a chat, and we knew what people were doing. We're working down the line on different projects, different proposals. Somebody needs a graphic artist one day, they need an anaerobic digester designer another day, you know, they need a film producer the next day. Skill sets are always needed. It might not be full roles that we have yet, I will say. We will get there one day, but we definitely have project work that crops up, and it's so important that we know who's out there in our community, who has what skills, and how they might fit into the work we're doing. So please connect with us.
Okay.
I would reiterate that for us in the Grow Remote community, and it's been extremely interesting for me. Like I said, I didn't know community management was a career path until it was in front of me. And of course, I'm deep in, you know, the Grow Remote stuff, and that's where the passion was. So, you know, that's what we've been at. And I invited someone to come and speak to us from a really, really big remote company there a couple of weeks ago, and he turned around and offered me a job. So it is kind of typical, you know, when you're not looking, it can turn up. But what has shown up for me very much is if something happened in the morning and Grow Remote was gone, which I totally wouldn't want, and I don't think is going to happen. We're looking really, really good, thankfully. But I know I would be so professionally secure. It's the most professionally secure I've ever been in my life. You know, it's been very precarious employment for me up to this point. I was in hospitality and then became self-employed. I think it is that hard push initially to get into a community, to get reached out to people, and that's where the connections are happening. Just like you're saying, Deirdre, we host a virtual coffee every Tuesday through Grow Remote. It's amazing the connections that have been made there already. So I think it's something you just can't really underestimate, the power of those networks.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, there's a lot of talk, and I think there will be lots more action as well around the whole area of, you know, green jobs. I think green recovery has been talked about, the Green New Deals. You know, we're hearing that being spoken about at all levels now. And as I said, that call earlier today, you know, that we look at all sectors in terms of you know, producing solutions. So the next question as well, I suppose, it's really looking at, you know, any courses or work experiences that we would recommend to facilitate finding work in a sustainable area like food production. And I mean, obviously, if I'm not sure where you're based, but if you're in Kerry, there is the ETB, there's ITT Tralee, and then I suppose there's just, you know, and then obviously UCC, but as I say, I'm not sure where you're actually based. But I know that so many people who are doing this area, you know, in sustainable food production, it's their passion, and then they just find the ways, avenues start to open up. So they follow that passion, and then opportunities and possibilities start to open up. Does anybody else want to add to anything for those?
I suppose in the area of agri-food, agri-tourism, and encouraging the sustainable production of those, the project that we were recently successful in funding for is a 3-year project to encourage those businesses, to encourage links between the agriculture sector and the tourism sector, and to promote new businesses out of that. So we're certainly going to be running numerous events over the 3 years to bring those two sectors together, and to find the support mechanisms that are needed to encourage new businesses for any of those who have an entrepreneurial streak out there. Please watch that space as well. It's called the Plutus Project.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre. Yeah, and food is a huge area, and I suppose, you know, one of our steering committee, Thomas O'Connor, you know, was Manna Organic Farm himself in Clare, and they have the Manna Organic Shop, and I suppose they very much, you know, which has been feeding the kingdom, you know, by 2030, and really looking at, you know, where our food is coming from, and, you know, the fact that so much of it is imported, and how much are we able to produce ourselves. We could be feeding ourselves much more than we are at present. So there's huge opportunities there, I think, and this year showed us a little bit more, you know, in terms of people getting out into the gardens, you know, during lockdown. And I know one of the questions, Katrina, that you had as well was, you know, even though this period, this last 6 or 8 months have been difficult, you know, with the pandemic or the coronavirus, you know, have there been lessons? Have there been things that we've learned from that time that I think speak to this subject that we're talking about now?
Yeah, I mean, I would hardly agree with what Rose said earlier on, and Deirdre, that the idea of remote working, you know, if you were trying to trial that experience pre-COVID, it would have been almost impossible. Now, I'm really mindful that when we talk about COVID, obviously for a lot of people that was a really, really difficult time. There are people who lost loved ones, people who've been very sick, and I'm not at any stage saying that it was, you know, it was from this we learned all these wonderfully positive experiences. But I suppose from every dark, challenging period that we pass through, there is potential for learning. And I think that even in previous jobs that I've been in, if I'd said, look, let's try remote working for a month or two, that there would have been a huge resistance to that, and that it would have involved setting up all kinds of protocols and procedures and health and safety. Whereas what we learned in a way from the pandemic is suddenly we were thrown into the situation where we had to adapt really quickly. So that was interesting. And I suppose on a personal level, I had spent some time with somebody who's been unwell in sort of Monkstown, Dunleary in Dublin. And what fascinated me was it suddenly had a sense of community, which it had never had before. It had always been a sort of very, very affluent, very privileged place. And suddenly, you know, in the middle of November, people are going down to the sea and hundreds of people are swimming and spending time together. And all you hear are the sounds of people shrieking as they ended up in the cold water and people strolling around with towels under their arms. And you think it was July if you were in Dunleary last weekend. So there's that. And I think there's also that sense of a kind of resilience that when we're kind of thrown back on ourselves, we're kind of tested, our mettle is tested a little bit. We've lost a lot of skills that we would have had, particularly probably over I say my generation, and if you look at the generation preceding me and the kind of skills that they had. So on a sort of very, I'm using this as an example, and I'm hoping this is something that won't continue, but I haven't been able to access a hairdresser since March. So I have been cutting my husband's hair throughout that time, something that he would most certainly not have let me do pre-COVID. And yesterday in desperation, my sister cut my hair because I didn't want to present my wild locks to you today. So I suppose it just shows you the things, again, that we might have considered beyond us, or looking at how we can repair things and mend things and how we can focus more on the idea of our own community. I think that's something that really, we did find that strength. And for some people, a reconnection with nature that they might felt they had lost. I don't want to overstate that. I'm a little bit skeptical as to whether that will endure. But it was great that people who maybe felt that nature had become almost invisible to them, felt that they had reconnected and that had a significance. And if that has a significance, well, then it's worth protecting. So those are all positives that have come out of what has been and still is, you know, a very challenging experience for everybody.
Yeah, and I suppose I just even add to that, you know, I just saw a report, we can put the link into it, but, you know, it's a IPBS, it's an intergovernmental panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And that just came out a couple of weeks ago, and where they really look at how, you know, this pandemic is a symptom. And, you know, I'm always so conscious, and we in the, I suppose, transition movement are aware that there are other external shocks. We've had them already, you know, different climatic things, and it's just that we need to be, as you say, building that resilience. And I think there's been a lot of talk here about that kind of the community supports, about a vibrant community, about people really thinking about their jobs in terms of being a livelihood, you know, so and about it aligning with their values. Sometimes we have seen, well, our personal and our private values are one thing, and then the values that we have out there in the world are something different. And if we can bring much greater alignment between, you know, the values that we espouse in our private lives with, you know, how we are in the world in terms of, you know, how we behave with the environment, this amazing place that sustains us and supports us all the time. I keep thinking that and saying that, and I think, you know, this year maybe people have very much felt that, particularly in the first lockdown. But yeah, here again, we're in November at the other end, and we're not finished yet. We haven't come through. I'm just conscious that there are a couple more questions, a couple more points in the chat. There was one there from John. I know you've responded there a little bit, Rose, as well. John was talking about, you know, the impact on tourism, and I suppose, you know, I live here on the Dingle Peninsula as well, and as does Katrina and Deirdre, and you know, obviously this year a huge impact everywhere on on tourism. So I'm just looking for that question. Do you want to read it out there, Rose? You responded to it. It was
John just said, I'm a graduate student at UCC and I'm working on a model to represent resilience of coastal and marine tourism sector in Bantry and Valencia. I was curious about the impact of COVID on tourism activities and businesses in the area.
Yeah. And I don't know, I suppose in Dingle, all I can say is that, yeah, there was a huge influx of people into Dingle during the summer months. But yeah, many of the, I suppose, activities that would have been part and parcel of you know, our calendar, you know, the food festival and various other events all the way through since May, you know, the failing about, and all of those this year, like everywhere else, have been suspended. But I don't know, Deirdre, if there's anything on that you'd like to say. I suppose
it's just worth commenting. I really noted the resilience of the tourism sector this year. I mean, it was pretty shocking back in March. It felt almost funereal when the lockdown came first, just at the start of the season. It changed. I mean, it changed all summer. People changed their businesses, they adapted, they changed the models. We now have virtual tours of Slea Head. People connected with their customer base through online techniques. Dingle Lit ran this weekend. So I suppose I've been amazed and proud of the people here on the peninsula and how they adapted so quickly and so well. And there was I suppose a very successful tourist season here for July and August.
I think it'd probably be fair to say that whole year-round tourism that Dingle had slowly developed over the last decade, that would have been really impacted. I agree absolutely with Deirdre. During those busy months, there was a massive amount of domestic tourism, but I think if you talk to most tourist businesses, a lot of them really would have suffered quite significantly, and they really would have felt the fall off of business, you know, after that main sort of chunk in the summer. They really would have felt that. So I think it's been a very, very hard. I agree absolutely with Deirdre. They've adapted in whatever way they could, but I think, yeah, it's been very tough.
Okay. I'm just conscious it's 1 o'clock, and Lisa, I'm just wondering, there have been a few links put into the chat there, and I know that Brendan has just inputted, Brendan Toohey has just inputted a link there, but from Kerry County Council, who produced a report on the impact of the pandemic. And yeah, I know that there have been many initiatives, I suppose, to help and support businesses, you know, by Kerry County Council and the Enterprise Office and so on.
So yeah, the links,
you can send the link
afterwards. Yeah, and I know Rose had popped in some stuff about Grow Remote as well, so I can share those out to you after things that are included in the chat.
I suppose unless anybody else has anything urgent they'd like to say, I just want to say thank you very, very much to you, Lisa, and Moving On for putting on this event today, and to Deirdre and Rose and Katrina for all of your inputs. It's been a pleasure to converse with you and in the pre-planning as well. And I'm sure we'll see lots more of each other as the time goes on.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you for all your help, because I've learned so much in the last few weeks about all this. It wasn't an area of expertise of mine, but your support and your knowledge has been fantastic. And thank you to all of those who joined this morning. And you'd have got an email from me about the webinar to come out from my email. So look, if you need to make contact about anything or want any more information or interested in collaborating on any other talks or anything, do reach out. And thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Mary.
And the very last thing I would just say, because it was in our questions, was that, you know, as we're coming into Christmas, that, you know, every euro we spend speaks about the kind of world that we want. So we're coming into perhaps an easing up of restrictions next week, and we're being encouraged to consume. So perhaps that we think about how we spend that euro, because it does say a lot.
It's a multiplier effect in the local economy as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's just
and no better place than Dingle.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll keep it in Mayo though to stay local.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye now. Bye.